How's it going, guys? It's Epsilon here, and in today's video we're showcasing one of the most outrageous tier 10 mediums in the game, quite possibly one of the best mediums that you could possibly get, and this is the Object 907, the tier 10 Russian medium tank that is genuinely just superior in most ways. I mean, here you can see the armor model of the tank getting this boat-shaped hull, which makes this tank very good at being able to side scrape if you're showing the rear of the tank, allowing you to pull around corners, making it very difficult for your opponents to be able to reliably pen you. They can pen this lower portion of this tank if they can get their shot on it. But often when you are pulling back and being a bit of a nuisance, this tank can be really annoying. Now there is this area here and of course this area here which can be penned, but ultimately very solid. And from the front of the tank you can make this wiggling motion to allow people to really struggle to be able to pen. Granted, the lower plate is basically pennable by most things, but remember you're a medium tank, so you're not expecting a whole lot. But it's where the turret is that this tank comes in to its element, with such a brilliant turret for the most part. Other than the fact of these cupolas, which can be penned, but they're quite small, and so reliably penning them is a little bit difficult, along with this area above, which can be overmatched by 120mm guns. But remember, using the 5 degrees of gun depression that the tank gets, that basically becomes impossible to hit, so don't worry about it for the most part. But remember that 120mm will basically be able to overmatch the roof area of your tank. But that's not the key statistics of the vehicle. These are the key statistics of the vehicle. 3,750 damage per minute. You've got really good accuracy, 0.3 dispersion, which is really fantastic. Of course, we are kitting the tank out with everything that is going to bonus this tank, or give a bonus to the tank. So we've got ventilation, rammer, and improved aiming. So all three are really nice. We then got full premium consumables, and then all of the perks added on as well. So this is the maxed build that you can possibly set up in the 907. So 3,750 damage per minute, pulling up there with some of the top tier mediums in terms of damage per minute. Nothing too beyond outrageous in that department, but combined with the fact that you get that armor model and of course all of the other aspects of the tank, 55 kilometers an hour top speed, the armor, you've got great dispersion, great aim time, you've got good penetration, and of course you get APCR as standard, and of course heat as premium, making this tank even better at being able to just pen everything. And yeah, really amazing tank to play. Of course, as soon as you start loading heat, the armor becomes worse and worse, but ultimately a very good tank. And of course, let's showcase some replays as to how you can play this tank, or maybe how you can come up against it, and hopefully that will be enjoyable for you and you can maybe learn a thing or two about this vehicle in particular. The first replay that we have today is on one of the maps that probably suits the 907 quite well, considering that this is a heavy themed map in Himmelsdorf. This is probably very well suited to the 907. So what makes the 907 so good? Well, you've seen in the statistics of the vehicle how good the damage per minute, as well as the fact that this gets the mobility, the slight armor advantage over a lot of other mediums, and kind of a bit of troll armor as well. And you can see here straight away up against the 277. Now this early position is usually pretty good because of the fact that you can get early damage on people that maybe have advanced a little bit too much towards him. And you can see here already 900 damage picked up on the 277, and of course him ploughing rounds up to 1,200 damage so far. And the 277 obviously very triggered about the fact that this 907 has decided to pick on him at the beginning of the game, and unfortunately for the 277 decides he's going to want to throw away the rest of his vehicle towards this tier 10 medium tank. And yeah, what, for the sake of 2 damaging hits? I wouldn't say that that's the best play from a top tier heavy in this sort of game. But either way, a decent result for the 907, albeit he has lost a fair chunk of hit points, and the STB1 once again hits him as well. So not particularly the best health point pool at this point in the game, but he has secured the banana line for his team and allowed them to progress towards the enemy 277 also on the opposing team. Now at this point, You're probably thinking as soon as he can clear up the damage on this flank, he can then progress towards one of two options in this game. So you can either go up the hill after securing the kill on the 277, or you can push towards the WZ and the object 283 on the enemy team, which are over on the kind of western side of the map. But you know, you have to make up your mind as to what you want to do. Is your team going to survive the onslaught of opposing tanks up on the hill to the point where you're going to be able to come up from behind them and take them out before your team are taken out, and then of course they can all turn around and take you out? Or are you going to get taken out by artillery, who narrowly misses you, and of course he doesn't get taken out, quite luckily, against the GW Tiger, who had obviously preemptively decided to move into position. So initially he looks like he's going towards the 268 version 4 and the STRV and the Cobra on the enemy team, and then he looks like he's going to go up the hill, but indeed he actually decides to go towards the opponents on the west. And this is the difference between maybe a player that understands how to utilize the map control, and of course at this point you've got to help out your team against the STRV, and this is the play that I probably would have done, because once you've secured this flank he can then deal with the YOLOing heavies and everything else that have pushed down off of the hill, and of course by the time he would have actually got up on top of the hill he'd then have to face off against all of the opposing tanks who've steamrolled the hill anyway. So he decides, you know what, it's time to lock down the STRV, and a lovely shell to begin with hits the track of the STRV, allowing him to lock him down, and that's one, that's two, and oh look, a third shell. And you can see the reload of this vehicle just being superb, and unfortunately for the STRV he's perma-tracked out in the open, allowing the 907 to just farm him up, and then at this point finishing him off with the final shell. Now pushing on towards the Cobra, who for some reason hasn't even realised that his teammate in the STRV has been taken out, or at least was getting farmed, and unfortunately for the Cobra he's also back in the garage. So you can see here the 268 version 4 also in a precarious position where either he decides to turn towards the 907, or he decides he's going to go towards and keep facing towards the opponents on his team, also further on down on the tracks like the Cobra and the IS-3-2. Now luckily for the player here in the 907, he does have a brain, and instead of staying back here where he'd be open to shells from the attacking team, he does indeed pull around this side of the 268 version 4 and avoids taking any more hits unnecessarily, and then of course ammo racks the 268 version 4 and also allows himself to get into a position like this, which just allows him to farm the opposing team. You can see here the STB1 pulling out side on and taking not a single hit after the initial one. So it's been a pretty aggressive game in the 907, and he's been able to farm up 7,800 damage already, pushing over 9 or 8,000 when you combine the damage, and you can see quite readily how easy it is to just farm up damage in a result like this. But there is one thing that you don't know, is that what the enemy team are going to do, because they are up on hit points, and it's not necessarily a terrible position to be in a tank like this, because you do have the ammo count at the moment, 16 rounds total, and you can deal damage to the remainder, and most of them are on a one shot, at least at the moment. You've got the 13105 who's on a one shot, you've got the 268 version 5 which is on quite a bit more hit points, you've got the 257 who appears to be on full hit points, and there is just one tank left, which is the Badger. Now we don't know how much hit points the Badger's on, but I guess you could kind of work backwards as to how much damage they've done, but a nice round into the 268 does a little bit of damage, and you really need to get rid of this 268 version 5 before your team start to get pumped from the other side. You're seeing the FV215B getting attacked from the Badger from behind, and the 215B is on full health at this point, but with a Badger farming him from the behind and a 13105 who's coming from the other side, who's going to place all 3 rounds into the back of the FV215B, it's not looking good. Now Badger unfortunately is side on to the 907, and he gets up behind him, allowing him to avoid taking any shells from the 13105, who might reload in just a second. and he places a few rounds into him. Now, a lucky shot from the enemy tank, who obviously didn't aim in the 268 version 5, does actually deal some damage. Now, a brilliant play here to ram the 13105, finishing him off, and then now it's a 1 versus 1 against the 268 version 5. So some brilliant rounds, some brilliant plays here coming in from the 907, and unfortunately for the 268 version 5, it's not looking good. Although he does bounce off of him, which is not the scenario you want. He places another one into the 268. And at this point, he's kind of side scraping against him, or at least trying to make it difficult. And actually, the 268 version 5 bounces, and he finishes him off. Oh my word, the corner of death for the enemy team here. 3 vehicles all taken out in quick succession, and oh god, the 257 comes around the corner and places a round. But you'll notice down in the bottom of the screen, only 2 rounds left. And it's a case of trying to find the rounds into the 257, and unfortunately he's now down to just 1 HE round, and there it is. The unfortunate demise of the 907 is of course going to come eventually. Now the 257 on the enemy team just doesn't know what day of the week it is, and if we just skip through, speeding up the replay, you can see here the 257 just bouncing and continuing to duke it out, and bouncing again, and then continuing to come around the side and bouncing again, and the 257 just doesn't know what to do. And unfortunately, eventually he does get taken out, but primarily down to the fact that the 907 just ran out of rounds, and unfortunately if he had had more rounds, or had used them even more efficiently than he'd already done, then maybe he would have been able to take out the 257. But it is unfortunate, but a great round of World of Tanks to have picked up as many as he did within this replay, and showcasing exactly what the 907 can do. But let's jump into the next replay and see if this can continue in other games in this tank. So you might be thinking that this cannot simply be replicated, right? On World of Tanks, surely that is not a common feature with the 907, but that would be wrong assumption with this tank. And of course we're seeing Hector here play in the 907, who has obviously 3 marked the vehicle, knows exactly how this tank works, and is going to utilise it on El Haluf. Now this game is an insane one as well, and it is a true carry in one of the most powerful mediums in the game, if not one of the most powerful brawling mediums that World of Tanks has to offer. Now straight away you can see that the speed of the 907 is comparable to the Leopard 1. Now you'd think, oh, well, if it's comparable to the Leopard 1, then maybe it doesn't have that armor model, but you already know, having seen the first replay, that the armor model can work too, and it allows you to block rounds up against most tanks at this tier if they don't fully aim. Now granted, you can pen the 907 if you know the weak points, but when it's this quick and available to bounce around, and when you're angling like this, you can bounce quite a few rounds before the opponents can successfully get a damaging hit. And you can see here 900 damage already within this replay, and consistently going up and up and up, and this replay continues along that path all the way to the end of the game. And you can see here just locking down the tracks of the 780, which is to all intents and purposes just a terrible tank in my opinion on the game. But either way, you're seeing now that the enemy team are all locked up on this ridgeline trying to dig out this 907, and it's just not going to happen within this. And you'll see how one of the best players just utilizes the fire rate of the enemy tanks, just waiting till they fire, pulling round, dealing damage, pulling back around, avoiding the damage by just showcasing a very angled upper plate, which they're just never going to be able to pen. And you can see here the enemy team really struggling to gain a foothold on the ridgeline against the Object 277 on the friendly team, the IS-7 and the M60, along with of course our infamous 907. So already 2,200 damage done, and equally just as much damage blocked as well. So this is something that you probably wouldn't see with an Action X or any of the other kind of tier 10 mediums, and maybe you'd see it with some of the Soviet mediums, maybe, potentially, but even still, probably not. And with the fire rate of this vehicle being as it is, just the damage potential that the tank has with 3,750 damage per minute, it's so easy to start racking up the damage, as well as pushing forward and being super aggressive, as the tank really is towards in terms of its gameplay style. It is very suited, I guess, towards the aggressive playstyle, and someone that knows how to be aggressive and knows the weak points of enemy tanks is going to really enjoy playing this tank. Now, granted that there are quite a few heat rounds going out from this point onwards, since the standard rounds have been depleted against the mediums and you're coming up against a lot of heavies, you've got to kind of really start dishing out the damage towards these opponents straight in front of you. The Super Conqueror, the M60, and of course the CS63, which by no means has anywhere near the turret armor that this tank has, and so isn't going to bounce very much against the heat rounds with 330 pen. Now then, Super Conqueror is a tank that is, to all intents and purposes, a solid vehicle, but probably isn't going to be all too good against the wrath of these rounds going into the lower plate. Now, he does go forward and just consistently dealing damage to the Super Conqueror, and the Jaeger on the team decides, you know what, it's time to start doing something maybe, or trying to deal some damage, and locking down just constantly the enemy team. Not only going for damage but also the tracks is something that a lot of people forget, is that you can still deal damage to both the tank and also the tracks, and unfortunately for the Super Conqueror he takes a lovely big old hit, and there you go. 6,000 damage combined just over within this replay so far. The Jaegeru now pushing forward as well, and the AMX M4 on the enemy team really suffering at this point to be able to do anything, and yeah, he's back at the garage as well. The M60 on the enemy team really not going to do a whole lot at this point, with the majority of the team now advancing towards him, and the heat rounds just going straight through the upper plate and finishing him off. Now, there was an STRV, there's also a VZ on this side, but the accuracy, aim time and all of the benefits of being a tier 10 medium come into play against that heavy tank, which if he can catch you out can be a real nuisance, but at this point in the game that's not really the case. The enemy AMX is now pushing forward, but with a UDES 1516 on the enemy team now pushing up, he needs to deal at least one shot of damage, bringing him down to a one shot. The team have faltered, they've disappeared at this point in the game, and the AMX M4 is deciding he's going to try and be the hero. He's going to come down and he's going to wipe out this 907. Don't know that that's going to be the case, but he bounces the first one, which is lovely. The 907 definitely doesn't miss, especially when he's got the aiming that this player has, and he's been consistent throughout this game. And unfortunately for the AMX, there's just not going to be another chance to actually deal any damage, and that's all of his hit points removed very quickly against this vehicle. Now, the UDES on the enemy team is of course up in this position. He actually does pen, and it appears like he actually hit the inside of the track and dealt damage, which you'd expect. Oh no, and then incoming 2 enemy artillery shells, one removing a decent chunk of hit points and basically stunning him into oblivion, and the CS63 joins his teammates in the garage. But you can see the utter devastation happening on this corner over here, with not only the enemy team but the friendly team as well. And that's maybe down to the fact that there's been a sneaky STRV not only straight in front, who's been in this sort of area, but also sat somewhere in the back. There are 2 STRVs on the team just farming up his team. And there you go, the STRV gets spotted on full health, so that's not good. And there is of course one more STRV somewhere, and you see him pushing forward, and he takes a shell. You can see he pulls back, he decides where is this STRV, pings the location. Oh no, the Object 261 now brings him down to a one shot for every single tank on the enemy team. Brilliant. 8,500 damage done, and he's reduced to minimal hit points because of the fact that the artillery is just being as they usually are. Now in that shell, he does manage to actually take out the ammo rack of the 907, so you've got to wait another 15 seconds before the ammo rack can get reinstalled back in the tank, which is not ideal. But at this point he's deciding, you know what, I don't want to push into an STRV that could be anywhere at this point, and so he decides to play it a little bit more passively, waiting for that ammo rack to come back into the tank, and that's exactly what he does. So you'll see that in this game there's been 4,000 damage blocked in a tier 10 medium. Yep, a tier 10 medium blocking 4k, and at this point you're thinking, where can I possibly go that's going to help out the team? Well, the STRV on the enemy team is of course up here, And there's also this enemy STRV that was located over here. So you're probably thinking he's going to make his way up to the base to take out artillery and come away with a decent chunk of damage for the enemy STRV. Now, is that the case? We don't know at this point. But what we certainly know is that the STRV on the enemy team is not going to be an easy one to dig out from the hill area. And so you have to be a little bit careful as to what you're doing. Now he pings to the 121B to fall back, but unfortunately for the 121B, he doesn't, and he gets taken out. So, on a one shot for all vehicles in the game, pretty much, even the artillery, if they miss, could probably deal the 377 hit points left on this vehicle. So, instead, he decides, you know what, it's time to go back to defend the base against the STRV, help out the GUI 100, help out the Object 261, and fingers crossed can come away with a victory, potentially having done nearly 8,500 damage and 9,500 combined damage. So really, really good result so far. But will that be the case? Well, I guess you'll find out within this, and I mean, you could skip ahead in the video if you're really that interested to just see the result, but it's really imperative to see how a vehicle can be played, not only being a very good vehicle, but played by a very, very good player in Hector here. So I guess that the thought process behind what Hector's doing here is to try and defend against this STRV, and I guess he was thinking maybe this STRV is going to be advancing towards the GUI, or maybe he's going to be caught out in the open. Now the STRV, to all intents and purposes, has actually taken a fairly decent defensible position. But it's not defensible that much, because the 907 is now using the mobility, 55 kilometers an hour top speed, which is perfect. Doesn't quite manage to hit the STRV in the back, but he's pushing towards the 261, who he subsequently misses, because of course being a non-turreted tank destroyer when you're not in siege mode is kind of difficult. And he then doesn't even manage to pen the 261, which is funny in itself. And then at this point, you now see the Batchat 15558 pushing towards the friendly artillery, and then unfortunately for the Batchat, he does get taken out straight away by, once again, the hero of the hour, Hector. And at this point, I think the Hector is thinking, well, maybe it's time to calm down a little bit. It's been all guns glory, or just firing all of the time, being a nuisance to the enemy team, picking up over 10,000 combined damage. You know how it is when you're a 3 Mark 907. This just isn't even a good game. And of course, yeah, just a brilliant result so far. But with an STRV that is, to all intents and purposes, a very, very quick tank destroyer that could crop up at any point and enter the siege mode, you could quite easily be taken out quite quickly and be surprised by the vehicle. So instead of trying to push towards a tank that is basically undetectable, you're going to sit back, relax, and hopefully the enemy STRV is going to come up into this position. At least that's what Hector's thinking, as well as granting some vision behind, so if anyone turns up from behind, you're going to be able to spot them as well. And then it allows you to either drive downwards towards the slope down here, avoiding the shell from behind potentially, or if anyone's here, deal a shot of damage and then pull back and do whatever you need to do from there. So a good position, defensible at the end of the game, allowing you to spot anyone in this area, as well as those coming up through this valley area here. And he actually spots the 261, who's playing pretty aggressively. And you might be thinking, well, if the 261's pushing up this far, maybe it's because his teammate in the STRV is also pushing up, because you'd very rarely see a 261 pushing up on its own, at least without any team support. So instead, he actually goes into this position, since he knows the 261 is going to be over here, and potentially the STRV is going to be pushing around with him to try and take out the GUI or himself within here. So gets himself into this position, allows him to basically target the 261 who might be in this area here, and therefore he does manage to spot the STRV. Now, STRV in this sort of location is not particularly great because he's not in siege mode, as we saw. Yes, he's going to struggle with the 907, and unfortunately for the STRV, he enters siege mode, but it's too late, and the enemy Object 261 gets hit by the Gree 100, who lowers his hit points even more, and now it makes it a easy kind of dub against the 261. And yes, the 907 secures the damage, and that really showcases that a 3 Mark 907 is just devastating for the enemy team, and they just couldn't deal with a tank with this much power in the game. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this replays that we've showcased, both the first and second. Of course, this one being a bit of a more exciting ending since he did win the game, but either way, a very, very solid game. So let's jump into the post-game stats, and of course if you don't want to see that, I hope you did enjoy this video and you subscribe to see more videos like it coming soon, and of course hopefully you've learned something from seeing the 907 in action. But let's jump over now. So the first replay that we had was of course a defeat, which was super annoying. As you saw, We Will Carry You not managed to fully pen and damage the enemy team in terms of the Object 257 because he ran out of rounds. And of course it's so funny coming up against a tank that only really won because because the opponent actually ran out of rounds. And here you go with the Mastery Badge, Fire for Effect, Bruiser, Demolition Expert, Duelist, Radley Walters and Top Gun, really trying to carry his team, but you can see not a single other teammate on his team managed to go above 2,000 damage. Yeah, not particularly easy to carry in those sorts of games, but either way, a very, very good game. Unfortunately, does lose some money in this replay, but even with that, a very, very solid game either way, picking up some money due to the personal missions that he's got and achievements and stuff like that. And yeah, really, really good one overall, but unfortunately, it didn't win. Unfortunately, We Will Carry You didn't carry hard enough to carry in this sort of game, but we won't put him past him in carrying in most of the scenarios. But coming top on experience, even though it was a loss, because that's how good of a game it was. Yeah, a really, really good one. But let's jump into the next one. The Hector, of course, managing to actually win in the game, picking up the Mastery Badge, the Fire for Effect, Bruiser, Hand of God, Duelist, Shellproof, Pascucci's, Radley Walters, Top Gun, Steel Wool and High Caliber, 290,000 silver, 5,000 experience and 32 bonds, as well as coming top on the team and top in the game in terms of experience, 9 kills, and picking up 78,000 silver when you factor in personal missions, personal reserves and all of the extras, and spending 170,000 on ammunition. So very expensive one for him, but a brilliant result either way. And hopefully once again you did enjoy this video. Please do subscribe and check out some of the other videos that are on the channel that you might be interested in if you've liked this video, or maybe you want to learn how to maybe increase your win rate using some of the guides that we have on the channel as well. So thank you very much, and I hope you join me there. Goodbye.